Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, and welcome back to another video on HeroQuest. Yes, we are returning to HeroQuest, and in this video, we are going to be focusing on the AxianQuest Infinite Dungeons expansion that is now available on DTRPG. And just to get the, not to bury the lead here, but AxianQuest Infinite Dungeons is the way that I will always play HeroQuest now. For me, for the kind of gamer I am, preferring co-op, preferring solo games, not particularly caring for one versus many games, and games where I can just play random dungeons. For me, AxianQuest Infinite Dungeons is the way that HeroQuest should be played. I absolutely love this expansion. It's elegant. It ticks almost all of the boxes that I look for. And I think it kind of elevates HeroQuest pretty highly in my estimation to make it become a game that I would actually turn to with a desire to play on my own. So in the last video where we talked about how I play HeroQuest Solo, we did take a look at some of the AxianQuest cards. We took a look at the artifacts decks. We took a look at the dungeon events decks. We took a look at the furniture deck. And we took a look at the heroic skills. All of these things can still be used when you are playing the Infinite Dungeon mode. And we'll talk a little bit about using those playing Infinite Dungeon mode as we go. So what is the Infinite Dungeon mode? The Infinite Dungeon mode is basically a jargon, a DM-less way to play HeroQuest, so you can play it solo or you can play it cooperatively. And when you purchase the expansion, this expansion was sent to me by the designer to cover on the Dungeon Dive. But when you purchase the cards, you're going to get a deck of small cards. Now, one thing, I wish these were normal size. Some of the font is a little small, especially for me. I have kind of bad eyes, but it's fine. It's fine. And you'll get a few decks in this deck, a few sub decks. So you will get your dungeon deck, and that dungeon deck will include all of the things that you will find in the dungeon, as well as some clue cards. And a lot of the quests will revolve around these clue cards. And then you will get a deck of main quests and a deck of side quests. And you will also get a small deck of evil masterminds. And these are kind of like bosses that you can fight against in a campaign mode. For one final quest, when you're done with your campaign, you will go into a dungeon and you will fight a random boss. So the other AxianQuest decks came with cards that had the instructions on the card. That is not the case with Infinite Dungeon. Infinite Dungeon will includes a link to a document that you can download or print or whatever. So I've printed mine, and there's a couple reasons for this. There just wasn't a lot of room on the cards for all of the rules, even though the rules are pretty simple and they're pretty elegant. But also things can change. So the designer can add some new things and tweak things. And there are a couple things that maybe I might suggest that he does tweak. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how I am tweaking the overall game of Infinite Dungeon to meet some of the things that I look for more. And that is basically expanding the Bestiary. Because I think the biggest criticism I have of Infinite Dungeon is the monsters that you will be facing are only the base monsters from base HeroQuest. And I think that'll get pretty boring pretty quickly, at least for me. So I've already come up with some tier systems and a way to substitute the monsters from all of the expansions for HeroQuest, because when you start combining all of your official expansions for HeroQuest, you actually do have quite a few enemies that you can face off against. Now, some of these enemies are kind of the same. They're kind of boring. We talked about that as one of my main criticisms of HeroQuest is the bestiary is kind of boring, even if there is some variety. There aren't a lot of differences between the monsters, but I also am working on that bestiary for Dungeon Dive patrons that does include some special abilities for the monsters. But let's take a closer look at Infinite Dungeon, how to set up a quest, how to set up your dungeon, and a little bit about how it plays. One cool thing is you can play with as few as 1 hero, and you can go up to, I think, 6 heroes, which is kind of crazy. I am playing with 3 heroes right now. I am playing with, I kind of reset my dwarf, Philin the dwarf, and Jaemond the wizard, and Roderick the barbarian there. So I'm playing with 3 heroes, and that does matter because how you set up the game, it does matter how many heroes you have. So you have your dungeon deck. This dungeon deck is comprised of mainly 3 types of cards. You will have these orange-backed cards, and those are your furniture, your dungeon dressing cards. You will have a few different colors of monster cards. So you have your skeleton and mummy and orcs and so on. So all of the base furniture from HeroQuest is represented in Infinite Dungeon, and all of your base enemies are represented by a card. And then you will also get a whole bunch of traps. And there are just a mess of traps to face off against. Dealing with traps is a little bit different because this being solo or co-op, you're not going to have hidden traps. Just when you open a door, when you go into a room and you draw a trap card, you will have to then face off against that trap and try to disarm it. Now, one of the things missing from this dungeon deck is a lot of the furniture from the AxianQuest furniture deck is not represented in this card or in this deck of cards. I believe there are about 12 pieces of furniture, 12 pieces of dungeon dressing. And it's all of these here. So skeletal remains, a bed, mineral growth, Iron Maiden, barrel or crate, magic circle, cauldron, mysterious lever, fountain pool or well, mirror, statue, and mushrooms. None of these have a corresponding card in the dungeon deck. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all of the cards that are represented in the dungeon deck and just draw on them with a Sharpie, where there would be maybe a 1 or a 2 in 6 chance to also encounter one of these other things in that same room. I would like to see small Infinite Dungeon cards for the rest of the furniture that is represented in the AxianQuest furniture deck. So that's one small criticism that I do have. So that's your dungeon deck. The really important part of your dungeon deck are these 4 cards here. You have 2 kind of yellowish, beigeish clues and 2 blue clues, blues clues here. And almost all of the quests are going to revolve around finding these clues. And some of the quests will say, you have to find 2 of the beige clues or yellow clues before you can interact with the blue clues, or you have to find all 4, or you have to do things in a certain order. So these cards there are very important. And then you will have your quest cards and your side quest cards. You will always draw 1 of each. This is your main quest. This is the thing that you are trying to do to solve the particular quest that you are on. And then a side quest. Now, sometimes the side quests are false rumors, and it mentions that in the book or in the rules sheet. Sometimes the side quest can't be completed. So the side quests are always considered rumors. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they aren't. I really do like that idea. It gives a plausible reason why sometimes things don't work out in an infinite dungeon. Sometimes you get the thing, sometimes you don't, depending on the luck of the draw. So let's set up a quest here. Let's shuffle up the quest deck, and we'll draw 1 quest here, put the rest off to the side. And we can also shuffle up our side quest deck and take 1 of those. So let's see what our mission is here. So we have the journey. So yeah, the text is pretty small. So brave heroes, you must go through this dungeon, a dangerous dungeon, and reach the other side of it to prove your valor and strength, your spirit. Clues. The 4th clue is the way out. Use a door or stair to represent it. So we are just trying to find all 4 clues. Maybe these are evidence to prove that we went through this dangerous dungeon. Reward. Each surviving hero that reaches the way out rolls a die and gains the following benefits. Nothing. You can go up a maximum of MP, BP, roll again. The benefit is permanent. Re-roll any 1 or 6 roll after this result. Okay. And then here we have our side quest, a haunted painting. According to a dark legend, the spirits of the restless dead that roam inside the dungeon are linked to a haunted painting. If you find a fireplace, you can destroy the painting by rolling a skull on a combat die. Once the painting is destroyed, all skeletons, zombies, and mummies will roll -1 defense die for the remainder of the quest. That's super cool. Another way to kind of interact with the furniture, with the dungeon dressing. So this game can be played in a light campaign mode. You can play just an infinite mode where you're just going on from one dungeon to the next. The campaign mode is pretty easy. You will roll up kind of a generic story, so just something that your evil mastermind is trying to do. You will draw a random evil mastermind. These are bosses that you will have to face off, and these are very powerful enemies that are going to be the final boss of your campaign. And then the campaign will have a variable number of quests, anywhere from I think it's like 6 to 9 quests that you will have to go on. There are rewards for completing a campaign, and the heroes can play multiple campaigns in a row until they reach a fame level of 7, and then they will retire after they face off against the mastermind. So you can play in just a completely random forever mode, or you can play in these kind of cool little story campaign modes. So very cool. But let's set up our dungeon here. So we have 3 heroes. So with 3 heroes, we're going to have 12 dungeon cards, plus D6 more, plus the 4 clues. So let's shuffle up our dungeon cards here. Okay, so we're going to draw 12 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, plus D6 more. 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's all of our dungeon cards here. And then we want to take our clues and place those in there. Okay, so let's give these a cut and a shuffle. Okay, so now we go through the steps of setting up the dungeon. To set up the dungeon, we roll a die. If the result is a skull, we place 1 card per hero face down in the central room. Okay, so do we have a skull? No skull. So we will not be using the central room probably for this quest. Roll a die for each of the 2 small rooms. So we have 2 small rooms over here. If the result is a skull, place 1 card in each room from the dungeon deck. Okay, so we're going to roll a die for each small room and 1 skull. So we'll place 1 card here in this small room just so it's barely on the camera. Okay, so place all the remaining cards from the dungeon deck face down in any of the rooms that we prefer, except for the large central room and the 2 smaller rooms. The number of cards placed per room depends on the number of heroes. So we are playing with 3 heroes, so there's going to be 2 cards per dungeon room. Now you could randomize this with some dice. I've been messing around with that. Or you could just do it however you want. Let's put 2 there, 2 there, and 2 there. We will put 2, 2, and 2. Let's go 2, 2, and 2. Okay, so all of our cards are out. That is going to be our dungeon. Now we are going to pick a room, an empty room to start in. So I'll place the stairs there, and I'll place my 3 heroes there. And then we take 2 closed doors, and we start by placing the doors into a room with a card or into a corridor. So I'll place 1 there and 1 there. And there, that is the setup. And we are looking for those 4 clues. We can keep our quest cards out there like that. Very, very simple setup. I love this system. I love the clue system. It makes exploring fun. You're actually exploring. And the way that the exploration works is pretty cool as well. So when a hero opens a door into a room, you look at the cards, you populate the room, and you deal with the results. In doing so, you also place another door that leads to another room with clues or into a corridor. If you open a door, let's say this a door here, if you open a door into a corridor, the heroes will have an opportunity to place up to 2 doors anywhere in the dungeon, and they have to place 2 corridor blockers, so 2 dead ends they also have to place on the board. For every door the heroes choose to place, you roll a die to see if there is a wandering monster. So there is a little bit of press your luck by placing those extra doors, because those extra doors might trigger wandering monsters. Wandering monsters are triggered a little bit differently in Infinite Dungeon. you look at your discard stack of your dungeon cards, and the first monster card discarded is your wandering monster. If there are no monster cards in the discard pile, then there is no wandering monster. So I do like that. It kind of, as the game progresses, there is a better chance of coming across wandering monsters. So it does give the heroes a little bit of time to explore before they have to deal with those wandering monsters. So let's take a sample turn here. Now the game does suggest, and this is one thing that I might suggest change, that if there are no monsters on the board, the heroes can just move a certain number of squares. They don't need to roll dice to kind of keep things going. It suggests with a movement value of 4. I think that's a little too few. I would like to see a movement value of 7, and that's how I've been playing. On 2d6, 7 is kind of your average. It's what you would roll most often, and so I think 7 is good. So the reason that I like to play with 7 movement is just to keep the game going a little more, and also because I am playing with this dungeon event deck, and I found that with a movement value of 4, there were too many events in a shorter period of time. So at a movement of 7, I found that was a nice balance. The way you use the dungeon event deck is that if there are no monsters on the board at the end of a hero's turn, you roll a d6, and on a 5 or a 6, you draw a card from the dungeon event deck. And the dungeon event deck can be anything from good things for the heroes, ways to heal. The dungeon event deck can also populate and spawn traps or monsters and all kinds of just really cool things to discover while you are playing. So I am playing with the dungeon event deck, and I think it does add quite a bit to this game. So let's just do a sample turn here. We're coming up here. I'm going to have my dwarf go first, and he'll move up here and open the door. So we'll have the dwarf go first, again, up to 7 movement. So I'll move him 2 there, and we will open that door. So we'll replace that with an open door, and then we will reveal the dungeon cards here. Let's see what we find. Okay, so we find a Dreadful Warrior, and hey, our first clue. Okay, so a Dreadful Warrior, of course, this is the Chaos Warrior, one of the most powerful monsters in the base game. So this says, for heroes at their first quest, and for novice players, this card is just a statue of a warrior and not a monster. So we'll just pretend that that's a statue. I'll go ahead and place my statue there like that. Having to face off again, actually having 3 heroes facing off against a Dreadful Warrior, we should be able to solve that, but no problem there. And we did find our first clue here. So I'm going to take this clue and I'm just going to add it to my stack down here. So we've found our first clue. And then we also will discard this. And then we will also place another closed door leading into a room with cards. So we'll place that there. Okay, so that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I don't want to open this door yet. I think we'll stop this turn and I'll just move the rest of the heroes into that room like that. And then that will end, I think that'll end the hero's turn there. And then now, because there are no monsters on the board, we will roll a d6. And if we roll a 5 or 6, we're going to draw one of the dungeon events. And a 6. Okay, so let's go to our dungeon event deck. Give that a little shuffle here. And what do we have? We have an infernal heat. The temperature rises to unbearable infernal heat, and all heroes lose a body point unless a hero with a water spell sacrifices 1 water spell card to dissipate the heat. After that, the temperature returns to normal. Okay, very cool. That's a really cool trap there. So I think I will probably discard one of my water spells. When I play with only 3 heroes or fewer than 4 heroes, and I am playing with the wizard, I say that I can start with all 4 of the classes of spells here. So here we have our water spells. Let's see which one I want to discard. I will probably discard Veil of Mist. Okay, so I cast this water spell, dissipating the flame, the heat, the infernal heat. So we are good to go. Again, now it is the top of the hero's turn. The dwarf will start off by opening this door. And we will see what's on the other side of this door here. Okay, we have the sorcerer's table and a weapon rack. Okay, so let's go ahead and put those in here. So here we have our weapon rack. And here we have our sorcerer's table. And now we will go to our dungeon furniture cards and we will find those 2 cards to see how we can interact with them. Okay, so we have our sorcerer's table and our weapon rack. So now we can just move, and then we want to put in another door, another closed door, either leading to another room with cards or a corridor. I'm going to place it leading out into a corridor because I think that's a little more interesting. So we'll move our heroes into this room here. And now we can select one of the heroes each to interact with one of these pieces of furniture. I think the barbarian is going to search the weapon rack. So we're going to roll 2 dice and see what we find on the weapon rack. A 10. You find a crossbow. Okay, so we would go into our equipment deck and then draw a crossbow for the barbarian. My wizard, of course, will interact with the sorcerer's table. So let's see what our wizard finds here. 6. Nothing useful. Okay, so that was that room. We have interacted with some furniture now. So there are still no monsters on the board. So we'll roll to see if we have an event. And a 5, we do have an event. And what do we have? A hungry rat swarm. Familic rats scurry along the dungeon halls and bite everything and everyone. Every hero loses 1 BP unless they roll a white shield with their defense dice. Then the swarm scampers away. Oh, crazy. So maybe these things came pouring out of the sorcerer's table when the wizard was snooping around. So let's see here. The barbarian has 2 defense dice. I'm looking for a white shield. No. Okay, so he takes a body point. The wizard has 2 defense dice, and he does. So he escapes the bite of the rats, and the dwarf also escapes the bites of the rats. So the barbarian takes 1 body point of damage from those rats. Okay, so now it's the top of the hero's next turn. We have a door leading out into a corridor. So this is how corridors work here. I will go ahead and open this door out into the corridor. And now I can place up to 2 doors anywhere. It doesn't have to be in line of sight or anything like that. You have a lot of freedom in this game to kind of shape the dungeon the way you want to shape it. I am going to place a door here. And I'm going to, because there are cards down here, and I'm going to place a door here. And then we'll have another door probably when we go in here to go into this room there. Just a little bit of an interesting layout. Now, because I placed 2 doors, I also need to place 2 blockers. And so these will block off anywhere in the dungeon. I'm going to say that there's a block off up here and maybe a block off right there. Now, if you ever block off a room that has cards and you can no longer get to it, then the heroes can automatically find a secret door leading into that room. So you're never going to completely block yourself off from completing a quest, but you do end up with some neat layouts of dungeons and corridors and dead ends as the game progresses. Now, because we placed 2 doors instead of just 1, for each door, we need to roll to see if we have a wandering monster. So we have 2. If we have a skull, we have a wandering monster. And we have 1 skull, so we have 1 wandering monster. We go to our discarded dungeon deck and we look for the first monster. And it was a dreadful warrior. But that dreadful warrior was just a statue. But we could go ahead and place that dreadful warrior somewhere in the dungeon as kind of maybe a little mini boss for level 1 heroes to face off against in that dungeon. So you can place him anywhere as close as possible to one of the doors. So if we were to place one of those, let's just say I don't have a dreadful warrior out, but let's say this was the dreadful warrior here. We could place him there, or we could place him there. So we would probably place him there, and so on. So that's how you would handle a wandering monster. And so now we can continue exploring, maybe go over to this room, open up this door, place 1 additional door into a room with cards or a corridor. We'll place that there. We will look here. And here we have a second clue and a trap. Cool. So we get to do a trap. So we've seen everything in this game now. So heavy blade, and the dwarf was the one who opened the door. So a heavy blade attacks the hero at the door, and all heroes and monsters within 3 squares at his left side. So that would be on this side here, because he's facing this direction. Left and right side, sorry. 3 squares on his left and right. So it swings. It's the pendulum that swings like that. Okay. With 2 dice, no defense roll allowed. Before the trap activates, the hero opening the door may disarm it by rolling dice. Okay, here we have dwarves need anything but a black shield. Nice. So this does give the dwarf a better chance of disarming this trap here. So as long as I don't roll a black shield, and cool, I roll a skull. So we successfully disarmed that trap. Now, if you were playing with any of the other kinds of expansions or the DIY stuff that maybe gave your heroes an XP point for disarming a trap, then that dwarf would have earned an XP point there. And we have found our second clue. 2 of 4 clues we have found. And remember, we're also still hoping to find this haunted painting, which is part of the fireplace furniture. So then we would move in here. Not a lot of enemies on this. I played a game just last night and I had all kinds of enemies. So we have no enemies on the board. Let's see if we have an encounter on a 5 or a 6. No encounter. Okay, so the next turn we would do the same thing. The dwarf would open this door here and we would see what we see here, and another trap and a throne. So we could place our throne. Let's say we also had an orc in there. So once you have an enemy, you can place the enemy anywhere, and the enemies do scale. So for instance, if you had abominations, 1 to 2 heroes, you spawn 1 abomination. 3 to 4 heroes, 1 abomination and an orc. 5 heroes, 2 abominations and an orc. So it does scale with the number of heroes. I like that quite a bit. So that's basically how AxianQuest is played. I love it. I think it's fantastic. This is the way that I will be playing HeroQuest. Probably adding to it, probably tinkering with it a little bit just to kind of mold it more into something that I prefer. Incorporating some of my other house rules, incorporating some of the other house rules that people have played. One thing I am working on is so in my last video, I talked about how I am working on a expanded bestiary that adds a lot of monsters and some monster abilities to make the monsters a little more interesting to face off against. And one of the things I am doing is coming up with a system for substituting the monster cards or the monsters on the cards from the base game with other monsters. So I have made a new stat called a power level. And the power level is a combination of your attack dice and your defense. Or I'm sorry, attack dice and body points. And I've put those into tiered systems. So we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5. The monsters that are bolded, those are the monsters that are represented in the game on the cards. So for instance, for tier 1, once you combine all of these monsters here are all of the monsters once you combine all of the official sets of HeroQuest. We have zombies, skeletons, goblins, and dead cultists as tier 1. Tier 2, we have orcs, the scout, and a specter. Tier 3, we have abominations, ice goblins, mummy, crossbowmen, the halberdier, and swordsman. Tier 4, we have dread warriors, gargoyles, magus guard, elven warrior, elven archer, and assassin. Tier 5, nothing is represented. These would be kind of bosses or mini bosses. We have frozen horrors, ogres, dread wraiths, giant wolves, polar warbears, and yetis. So in my substitution system, anytime you draw one of these cards associated with one of the bold monsters, you can substitute in any of the other monsters in that tier. So it just makes it easy. You can use more monsters. I haven't quite figured out when to introduce one of these tier 5 bosses yet. I might say every 3rd dungeon you go through, you have to face off against one of those in order as an additional quest or something like that. And so what I'm doing is I'm going through this bestiary here and adding this power level to where all of these monsters will be associated with a tier level that you can then substitute out at your will to have a more varied bestiary and have more just different kinds of combat encounters. So yes, that was an exhaustive look at Infinite Dungeon from AxianQuest. Now you can also use all of your artifacts from AxianQuest in between dungeons. The heroes can visit the artifact shop just like the instruction cards say, and for $500, I think they have a chance of drawing 3 of the various artifacts from the artifact deck and they can buy one of these artifacts and as kind of a way to upgrade. You can also still use your AxianQuest heroic skills to make your characters earn all kinds of different skills as ways to level up your character. So all in all, now with all of the cards, and I believe there is still a bundle that he has available on DriveThruRPG where you can get everything. This just makes HeroQuest amazing. I love it. I love playing this game, and this is a game that I will play quite often with the AxianQuest. So I guess the question is, am I playing AxianQuest or am I playing HeroQuest? And I'm basically playing a combination of both. It's kind of a 50-50. The basic rule set, the nitty-gritty rules on the table are still HeroQuest, but the way that the rules are governed and guided is AxianQuest. And those two things combined are great, because AxianQuest keeps the most important thing of HeroQuest intact, and that is the simplicity, the ease of play. But it takes away the things I don't like about HeroQuest, and that's basically the one versus many, non-co-op, non-solo mode, and adds in that kind of play, and I love it. So, all right, you guys, well, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at AxianQuest and this 4th video in the HeroQuest series. I'm sure there will be more in the future as this is further developed. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.